There's a lot of debate in the Fallout community around the main story factions of Fallout 4, and there has been since the game was released. People would argue over which faction has the right outlook and what faction would be the best for the Commonwealth. Of course, all of this depended on the values of the people debating this, as some people care more about freedom than they do safety, or less about practicality and more about their own subjective morality. These debates were often exactly that, subjective. But what if I told you that you can put all of that aside and at least talk about a topic involving the factions where the answer is clearer? Instead of wondering what faction is right, we could ask, what faction would win? What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael, and welcome to FudgeMuppet, the home of some of the highest quality Fallout and Elder Scrolls content on the internet. In today's video, I'm going to be explaining quite simply why the Institute would win against all the other factions in the Commonwealth. However, I will need to frame the video with some rules and basic assumptions. Firstly, this video gets rid of the sole survivor's role and discretion. Obviously, the sole survivor, that is the main character you play as, has the player freedom to make whatever faction he wants to win. You ultimately get to decide who rises to prominence in your own playthrough, but for the sake of this video, we obviously have to remove that variable. We also have to assume that all of the factions are going to be attempting to take each other out. We know this is the case because they task the sole survivor with wiping them out. And before people start talking about the Minutemen, there is no need for a detailed discussion regarding that faction. You may believe that they would be the best for the Commonwealth if they were to succeed, and that's fine, but they would not even stand the tiniest chance against the other factions without the help of the sole survivor, who basically instantly becomes their leader and does absolutely everything for them. The Minutemen are weak, small, and fractured by betrayal, and without the help of the sole survivor, perhaps they'd be killed as early on as being attacked by the raiders in Concord. It's really a non-discussion when it comes to the Minutemen regarding what faction would win if they're all really trying to take out the rest. The Brotherhood could smear them from the Commonwealth, the Railroad could have them assassinated quick smart, as could the Institute. It is these three factions the video will be considering as contenders: the Railroad, the Institute, and the Brotherhood. Luckily, most of the points about why the Institute would win are just so powerful, so we won't really need to dissect all of the weaknesses of the other factions nearly as much as we can explain, hey, look at this stuff which shows how much more overpowered the Institute is. Do remember though that technically any given outcome is chance-based. In a real-world scenario, there is always some sort of chance any of the factions could win. However, what I'm proposing is that the Institute has the biggest chance of winning by far. So first up, we have one of the most important advantages of the Institute, an advantage that is so important that it changes everything. You know, I actually used to think the Brotherhood of Steel would rule the wasteland if there was no interference from the sole survivor, until my good friend Zarek Zahacaron changed the game with one single word: teleportation. First things first, the Brotherhood of Steel do have an electromagnetic field surrounding their base, preventing Institute surveillance inside, and it also happens to stop synths from teleporting into the base. This means it would be difficult for the Institute to just teleport into the base and kill the Brotherhood of Steel with a bunch of suicide bombers. That said, the Institute can teleport everywhere else in the Commonwealth, as you find out through playing the storyline and exploring their capabilities. You can even teleport back to the Institute from your current location when you need to. Teleportation is one of the Institute's biggest secrets, and without ever discovering it due to the sole survivor, the other factions are left in the dark as to how the Institute works and where they even are. But even placing that aside, teleportation has huge advantages. Obviously, they don't showcase this in the storyline, otherwise it wouldn't be as interesting and the game wouldn't be fun. You know how Gandalf doesn't just use his magic to fix each and every problem? Well, Bethesda wouldn't make the Institute just use their teleportation because it would make them too overpowered and the faction would be undefeatable very fast. However, it is in the law that they can teleport whenever they want and wherever they want in the Commonwealth, bar for an extremely few select places and scenarios, like the Brotherhood base. Without the sole survivor interfering, imagine how easy it would be for the Institute to just achieve their goals by teleporting to places. They could just teleport a squad to the mass fusion reactor and grab the beryllium agitator. The synths also won't take radiation damage. The Brotherhood definitely would not beat them there, and the Institute has no reason to wait around. They will just go and get it straight away. No mind games between father and the sole survivor, no testing your loyalty, no emotional decisions. This would then be used to power up the Institute Institute's main generator, preventing the Brotherhood of Steel from getting it and using it to power Liberty Prime early on. Before they could power him up by some other way later, the Institute would have so much time to wreak havoc however they'd like. Keep in mind, at the start of the game, the Brotherhood of Steel haven't even arrived yet. Try your best to think of all other times in the main story where the Institute could really just get everything done all in a day's work because of teleportation. The main problem is that the Institute isn't trying to dominate the wasteland, because if Bethesda did that, the game would be over before it began. The Brotherhood of Steel, on the other hand, is trying to gain control, but for the sake of the video, we're talking about what faction would win if they all tried their hardest. Also, keep in mind that without the sole survivor, Kellogg would still be alive, and he would still be kicking ass, likely in place of where the sole survivor is in many instances. Imagine him just teleporting everywhere, doing most of the stuff the Institute asked the sole survivor to do. It would be very effective. I don't see why he couldn't also help Dr. Lee reprogram Liberty Prime to destroy the Pridwen just like the sole survivor did. Also, keep in mind that the secret of teleportation is exactly that, a secret. How would the Brotherhood of Steel find out about teleportation without the sole survivor? They probably wouldn't. Kellogg would go assassinate Virgil, which he had plans for before he runs his mouth, or alternatively, in the extremely unlikely event of the Brotherhood of Steel somehow coming to the Commonwealth and finding Virgil first and making it all the way through the glowing sea with a squad that didn't die, I'm sure they'd even perhaps get in a fight and kill Virgil anyway. They're not exactly fond of the Institute, let alone a super mutant. Now, I know there's an electromagnetic field around the base, so you can't exactly teleport suicidal Gen 2 synths into the base, but what about above the base? Why not just put in some sort of effort to have 20 synths strapped with bombs falling from mid-air above the electromagnetic shield, so then they would just land in the base and explode, doing tons of damage to the Brotherhood. There's just so much that's possible with teleportation, which makes the Institute severely overpowered in a lore sense. Again, Bethesda would never let them exploit it, as it would ruin the main story of the game, but really think about everything that's possible. Their mobility is unmatchable. There is no way the Brotherhood of Steel can outdo the Institute when it comes to mobility. No doubt the Brotherhood are superior to the other factions in this regard due to their vertibirds and the Pridwen, but teleportation? The Institute could beat you to absolutely anywhere. Same thing goes for the Railroad. They don't know where the Institute is, and they won't find out without the sole survivor's help. They're still hurting from their loss at the switchboard, in which the Institute found them and started wiping them out. They've run away beneath a church and are hiding there now, definitely under-equipped to take out the Institute, and even they fear their discovery at any moment. They're prepared to leave if the Institute come. The Institute is always on their tail, and if they don't go and wipe them out, then perhaps the Brotherhood eventually will. The Railroad have good surveillance too, but they have nothing on the surveillance of the Institute, which I'll get into next. It is the combination of this Institute surveillance mixed with the extreme convenience of teleportation mixed with the hidden location of the Institute which really would ensure their victory over the other factions. If ever the case, the Institute would know where to go before the other factions and would beat them there too. So, surveillance. How does the Institute have such good surveillance, and do they really? Well, there's a secret behind this, but first let's hit the basics. Like any competent faction, the Institute possesses a bunch of spies and agents on the surface. They also have other contacts that simply serve as paid informants. For example, did you know that even the traveling merchant, Trash Can Carla, actually gets paid caps by the Institute for trading sightings of escaped synths? Yeah, it goes that deep. Then there's the fact that the Institute are experts at replacing people with synth versions. We see that when we go to Diamond City, there is this very real threat of some citizens being synths without even knowing it. Generation 3 synths are that realistic, and while some of these synths gain a so-called free will, many are still outed and manipulated to serve Institute purposes. This allows the Institute to have political control, but also just goes to show how easily they could teleport somewhere, kidnap someone important, swap them with an Institute synth replacement, and disappear from thin air untraceable. Mayor McDonough is a good example of such a synth replacement. He ran Diamond City, Institute agents stalked him, they then replaced him, and now a Generation 3 synth is the mayor of Diamond City and an Institute agent. Think of how there are already so many other synths scattered around the place, some of which would be doing similar things. Magnolia is also a synth who is an influential singer in Good Neighbor. People go get drunk and run their emotional little mouths to her, and she would get all kinds of juicy info. Whether or not she actually reports that info to the Institute, or whether or not they're even tracking it, who knows? But it's anyone's guess if they are. Once I tell you a massive secret behind Institute surveillance, you'll probably be so impressed that you wouldn't doubt it. But before that, just realize the implications of replacement. The Institute can get synths into many factions and manipulate from the inside. Perhaps they can even write programming into a Generation 3 synth to have a faction leader killed if they ever find a way to harm the Institute. The Generation 3 synth wouldn't even know they're a programmed synth. Take Paladin Dance, for example, a shining example that an Institute synth can in fact find their way into a powerful faction like the Brotherhood of Steel, even if they are eventually discovered. Now imagine that the Institute teleports lots of Wastelander synths around the place who have been programmed to be decent soldiers. They end up getting recruited by the Brotherhood of Steel in the same way the Soul Survivor did, and many of them make their way through the ranks and gain control of the inside. The electromagnetic field may prevent teleportation, but it doesn't actually stop a synth from being in the area. They could waltz on in as new recruits. Some would eventually be found by Brotherhood checks, but not all of them. Again, see Paladin Dance as an example, and imagine how much damage the Institute could really do if they wanted to. Elder Maxon could be dead before he can even say beneath the Commonwealth. Also imagine how easy the Brotherhood would be to defeat if many of their members were Institute synths, even if they didn't know they were, and even if they couldn't be controlled remotely. All it takes is for someone to yell out their recall code and they'll shut down. There are examples in game which prove it. One is how Mama Murphy can tell the Soul Survivor a recall code, and it can then be used to disable a Corsair. Imagine defeating some Brotherhood paladins with a megaphone yelling out random numbers and letters. It would be pretty funny. The replacement of so many people highlights the extreme capabilities of the Institute to destabilize entire factions, and if they wanted to use them to easily defeat the Brotherhood or the Railroad, it would be so easy it wouldn't be fair. It's already bad enough not being able to fight an enemy you can't locate, but replacement and teleportation and surveillance just makes things ridiculous. But speaking of surveillance, let's get onto that spicy part, shall we? I want to credit a really great Fallout YouTuber for this one, and that's Oxhorn. He made a video all about how the Institute has covered the wasteland in synth birds known as Watchers. So a massive thank you. These birds watch over everything, and there's tons of them scattered all over the Commonwealth with cameras for eyes. Oxhorn shows a bunch of scenes that refer to this, such as when you go to defend the castle in the Minutemen questline. Ronnie says, "We've seen a lot of those Institute crow things sniffing around." We hear of this again at the Institute directors meeting when the head of the Synth Retention Bureau, Justin Io, reports, "Watchers show no additional threats beyond those previously identified." But what are Watchers? Who are they? Well, if you go into the concept art for Fallout 4 and look at all the birds, we find out. We find a bird with bright red eyes called a Watcher Sparrow, and also a Watcher Crow. The Institute already makes synth animals like synth gorillas and synth Brahmin, so it's definitely possible that the Institute have made synth birds. The evidence is stacking, but then it all comes together when we take a trip into the Synth Retention Bureau for ourselves. In one of the rooms, you can find a ton of monitor banks, each examining multiple scenes in the wasteland, all appearing to be from a bird's eye view. Oxhorn then goes to all of the effort of getting the files of these images and visiting their locations in-game. Pretty much all the time when you find the scenes that the cameras are pointing at, you find birds perched exactly where the camera angle is coming from. So it's pretty much confirmed that the Institute has eyes everywhere. Synth birds, ladies and gentlemen, you can't get much crazier than that. I'll leave the video linked in the description below. Tell him FudgeMuppet says hi. So with synth animals spying on you and then actual agents and informants everywhere, it's safe to say that the Institute's surveillance is far more advanced than that of the Railroad and the Brotherhood, so they beat the other factions on mobility, infiltration, location, and surveillance. They're just so overpowered, and there's just so many ways that the Institute could dominate the other factions if they really wanted to. But is there anything else to consider? The answer to that is yes. I mean, based on everything so far, it's pretty clear that the Institute would beat the other factions if they wanted to, but many people will probably be wondering, what about the raw firepower of the Institute? The Brotherhood of Steel has vertibirds, power armor, lots of troops, and lots of guns. Well, there's two answers to this. The first is that it doesn't matter. The second answer is that the Institute actually has a crapload of firepower too. So answer number 1 is it doesn't matter how much firepower the Brotherhood has. This is simply because the Institute is hidden and cannot be found without the help of the sole survivor. But what if the Brotherhood got Liberty Prime online and then got him to walk around the entire Commonwealth scanning for the Institute and then they found them? Well, there's always going to be tiny chances of something happening for the Institute to lose. There's no 100% certainties in life, but obviously this is super unlikely and there's still a 99% chance things would go the Institute's way. Liberty Prime would not be able to come back to life with the same capabilities you see him with at the end of the Brotherhood storyline, as the Institute can use teleportation to beat the Brotherhood to the mass fusion building, and they also have Dr. Lee on their side. Without the beryllium agitator, he won't be up and functioning in time, and without Dr. Lee, his capabilities are further nerfed. Even the replacement robotics expert for Dr. Lee in Diamond City could easily be prevented from helping the Brotherhood in the first place, as the Institute has spies everywhere watching what is going on, and even the mayor of Diamond City is an Institute agent. Again, without the beryllium agitator that the Institute could get before the Brotherhood of Steel even rocked up to the Commonwealth, Liberty Prime isn't going to be running around tossing nukes the same way you've seen him before. The other thing to consider is that the Institute does not win using all-out firepower anyway, so the capabilities of the Brotherhood are also made redundant by this. The Institute is far more tactical than that. As I've already explained in great detail, they can simply use their surveillance to find out what's going on, use synths to replace people or to create new wastelanders who are programmed to find their way into the ranks of the other factions, and then they can tear the opposing groups to shreds from the inside. Moving on to answer number 2. The Institute has a crapload of firepower as well. As I said earlier, there are many ways the Institute can be offensive, such as teleporting Suicide Bomber Gen 1 and 2 synths into enemy territory, even if they have to fall from the sky. If they need a beacon for it to work, that's still no problem. You could have a beacon launched into the air on top of any projectile, like a mini nuke, and then activate the teleportation and in fall the bomber synths. Or you could get a synth into the ranks of the Brotherhood of Steel, again we've seen this happen before, who then takes a vertibird, puts a beacon on it, and flies it above the base. It's really not too hard to think of ways to beat the electromagnetic shield. You disable it anyway in the main storyline, and Kellogg with a group of coursers would definitely be capable of that, and then as we saw at the end of the Institute storyline, in come the army of synths. And that's the other thing, the firepower of the Institute is a never-ending army of synths. However it works realistically, I'm not sure, but the entire concept of the Institute faction isn't very realistic anyway, so the Brotherhood of Steel has a solid army. The troops are strong of mind and body, and they have morale from their charismatic leader. They have a strong sense of camaraderie, and they're highly disciplined. But, do you know what is more disciplined than any human? A programmable synth. Do you know what is more fearless than any human? A synth robot who cannot feel fear because they're a robot. Do you know who is physically more capable and feels less pain than any humans? Synths and coursers trained since birth. The Institute may not focus on their army or showboat about it, and it may not be as grand as the Brotherhood of Steels, but it's just as deadly. The Institute also have plenty of guns for all these synths, and utilize technology like stealth boys with their coursers. The army is just replicated bigger and bigger with each new synth creation, as shown in the Institute base. They can birth a combat-ready soldier at least 10,000 times faster than any human can grow from birth into a competent fighting adult. Synths also don't need food to eat, or use toilets, or clothing in a proper war. Again, I say this to prove a point that the Institute is deadly, but like I said earlier, the Institute doesn't even need to go to these lengths to win. Also, I'm aware that the Institute wouldn't win over the crowds and the public people the same way the Brotherhood would. The Institute are pretty hated. I'm also aware that they might not necessarily be the best choice for the currently existing people of the Commonwealth, but there's no denying if they wanted the other factions dead, it could easily be arranged. The Institute is also self-sustaining, with enough water and methods of growing the human members inside the complex the food they need. Again, just saying this can sound silly from a realistic perspective, like how did the Institute even get all these resources and make so many breakthroughs so fast in the first place? I can't explain that, but it is the law, and that's all we have to go off. In terms of mentality, they also play to win and are happy to sacrifice. It's no worry to sacrifice a bunch of synths for them. They see them as slaves. When you look at the greatest achievements of human history, it was the bold and relentless who succeeded. Little came of having the kindest heart. Sorry, Railroad. So then, it's the Brotherhood versus the Institute. But as I have explained, it is ultimately the Institute who will win if the sole survivor plays no part in the debate. So in summary, here's why the Institute wins. Superior mobility via teleportation, superior surveillance via agents, spies, synthetic watching birds, paid informants and synths who replace and infiltrate, superior tactics by these same synths that can teleport or infiltrate and manipulate from the inside, superior resources, and a technically superior army, a superior location hidden away which no one knows how to access, and the ability to sustain themselves for a very long time. Like I mentioned, you can always think up little niche ways of the Institute being defeated without the sole survivor's intervention, but overall the chances of victory are stacked massively in the Institute's favor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching this video. I'm super happy that you watched it the entire way through and super excited to make more of these lore videos for both Fallout and the Elder Scrolls universes. Social media links are in the description below. Go follow us on Twitch if you want to see some absolutely golden streaming, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.